This court is now in session. Please be seated.
Your Honor, for the purpose of the record, we return back to the trial, Commonwealth versus Lindsay Clancy. All parties are present, including the defendant and including the 18 jurors.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. Members of the jury, we're going to return now to the direct exam of this witness. All right, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, before we broke, you were describing the various psychological tests that you conducted on Ms. Clancy. Can you tell us the results of those tests?
Yes, I can. On the MMPI, which I spoke about first, and this was, of course, 3.5 years after the alleged offense. So it's going to describe, much of it is going to describe her thinking and feeling and behavior in April of 2026 rather than January of 2023. But it's something that's always a challenge when you try to reconstruct what happened some time ago. And so some of these tests were administered from the standpoint of what was it like for you back then. But the MMPI was delivered in terms of how you're doing right now. And she, on the response style scales that I talked about earlier, she showed a slight tendency to underreport, to deny unusual experiences, although she did that in a way that was pretty sophisticated. She's a bright woman. And so given this, we kind of take into account a little bit the fact that she might be underreporting a little bit in terms of what's really wrong with her. However, there are a number of what we call clinical scales on this test, and she was not elevated on any of them, meaning that she's not actively symptomatic in many areas or in great distress in certain ways. But there was one scale that is elevated, and that is the suicide and death ideation scale, thinking about suicide and death. And I should say that Ms. Clancy has been on 1-to-1 suicide precautions, which is the highest level of precautions that a hospital can take, since she came to Tewksbury. This is a very long time to be on that kind of precautions, and what it says to me is that she was at risk for suicide, she remains at risk for suicide, and so she still is. The Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire I mentioned earlier, basically it's a measure of whether somebody is reporting experiencing as a child or adolescent adverse or traumatic events, and she was not, so she had a 0 on that. There were 2 measures of suicide intent. One is called Beck's Suicide Intent Scale, and the other is called the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. And I can sum up those results very quickly by saying that when she responded to one of them as she would have if she'd been filling it out in January of 2023, what it suggested is that this was a very serious suicide attempt at that time. And when she responded to both of them as she feels right now, she also was indicating that she remains at high risk for suicide, and hence the 1-to-1 supervision for 3.5 years. The brief symptom inventory is something where you ask people about a number of possible symptoms that they've been experiencing within the last month or so. Gave it to her under 2 circumstances. One is, how are you doing right now? That is around April of this year. And the other was, how are you doing in January of 2023? Her description of how she was doing in January of 2023 is that she endorsed feeling blue or still extremely depressed, feeling no interest in things, thoughts of death or dying, feeling hopeless about the future, feeling very self-conscious, with others, and the idea that something is wrong with her mind. She thought depression, suspiciousness, memory problems, problems with attention and concentration, and things like she was having trouble concentrating, so she'd be cooking, for instance, and she'd forget what step she was on. So most of these are consistent with symptoms of depression. And so I thought that they were good indications that she was endorsing feelings of depression, although she was improving somewhat from her December feelings. Something called the Obsessional Beliefs Questionnaire has 3 scales. One scale is kind of responsibility threat estimation, which is a belief about your personal responsibility and overestimation of threats. She was not elevated on that. A second was perfectionism and certainty. She was not elevated on that either, although she works hard and so on, but she was not elevated on the perfectionist aspect of this test right now. However, she was elevated on something called importance and control of thoughts, meaning that for her, it's always been important to be able to work hard and control what's going on with her mind and her life. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes that I think was making her depressed and hopeless and sad and so on is that she had been trying very hard since October to basically control the problems that she was having, and it wasn't working. It was not succeeding for her. Okay, and then there was something called the Lahagne-Slade hallucination scale. And so she endorsed the following things. Sometimes a passing thought will seem so real it frightens me. Sometimes I get distracted trying to concentrate on my work. That was something she endorsed back in 22 and 23. In the past, I've had the experience of hearing a person's voice and then found there was no one there. That was only on January 24th. I often hear a voice speaking my thoughts aloud, again, only on January 24th. I've been troubled by hearing voices in my head, again, only on January 24th. All right, so those were the psychological testing results, and I'm going to move to the last item on the PowerPoint here, which is why it was important for me to consider her motivation for killing her children. And this is something that, if you look at Lindsay Clancy, would be described as so out of character that I just like to know what could possibly have been going on. Because, for instance, when I talked to her and talked to her husband as well about how do you discipline your kids, it was never spanking, it was never hands-on, it was never anything like that. They both felt bad when they yelled at the kids. So it was one of those things that to imagine her doing something like this is really seems so out of character that I thought it was very important to try to figure out why it might have happened. So this is how I approached it. The other thing about the why question is it could well be something that is valuable to know when we're thinking about whether she understood that something was wrong, or when she was thinking about whether she could conform her conduct to the requirements of the law or control herself. The why question seemed important. So if I could have the next slide.
Sure. And in evaluating the why, did you come up with 2 possible explanations?
I did, yes, which is on this slide.
And so can you explain that, please?
I can, yes. There are a number of reasons in my experience why people harm one another, why people kill one another. And most of these reasons ended up not applying to Miss Clancy. I mean, it wasn't job-related. She wasn't in the military or the police. It didn't have to do with money or property or fame or anger or being callous or abusive or being afraid or doing it himself. None of those there was any evidence for. But there were a couple of things that started to have some evidence for, and this is what it looked like. One is the psychosis, the possibility that she had a severe mental illness, experiencing hallucinations, delusions, that sort of thing. And as part of that, on January 24th, experienced those symptoms that we're going to talk about in a minute. And I'm calling that the first bullet point there, acute psychosis with command hallucinations. The second possible explanation was as part of an attempt to take one's own life, as part of a suicide, one might harm one's children if you thought that would prevent them from suffering. And let me see if I can give you an example of that. If one of us were to learn, and we had no doubt in our mind that the Holocaust was coming tomorrow, and we thought that was going to be awful, and I can't live through that, and so I'm going to take my own life. If I had children, the question might come up, do I take them with me? Do I take their lives as well? Now, I'm not saying that I would definitely do that, but what I'm saying is that it would come up as a possibility in what I thought about. And so there ended up being, in my mind, two possible explanations for why she did what she did. The first being the acute psychosis with command hallucinations, and the second being this was a serious suicide attempt, and she wanted the children to be with her so she wouldn't be separated from them, and so they wouldn't have to suffer after she was gone. Now, in a minute, I'm going to talk about the evidence that I saw supporting each of those, but I will tell you right now, in advance of talking about that most of the evidence that I saw supported the second one and not the first.
And so, Doctor, if we could go to the next slide and you could tell us what evidence you saw for acute psychosis with command hallucinations. Yes.
The first was, that's what she said. I asked her that question, and that's the way she explained it happened. She said, sometime on the afternoon of January 24th, 2023, that she heard a voice, and the voice said, "This is your last chance. You have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself." If she actually heard a voice like that, that would be evidence of psychosis being experienced and what we call command hallucinations, where the voice is instructing her to do something. There were some other possible things that made me think that it could be a severe mental illness that she was experiencing, and two in particular. One was thinking that others might know her thoughts. Now, this is something that is a symptom of psychosis called thought broadcasting if it's experienced in a certain way. In thought broadcasting, if I'm experiencing that, I literally have the idea that if I'm thinking it, you can hear what I'm saying, just as if I were putting it on the television or podcast or a movie or whatever. It's just coming out that way. I asked her about that, and she said, and other people asked her about that too, and she said it was not thought broadcasting, but these were very vivid thoughts, and she thought that it might be that people could hear them as vivid and strong as they were. The second possible symptom is that thinking police might take her children. Now, in some of the records I saw people saying, "Wow, this looks like a paranoid delusion to me." And I will tell you that it didn't look either paranoid or like a delusion to me. And here's why. I'm a healthcare professional, and that means that in Pennsylvania and every other state I know, I'm a mandated reporter. If someone tells me in therapy or in an assessment that they think that a child is going to be injured or severely hurt or that might happen, then I'm required by law to contact Child Line in Pennsylvania. Ms. Clancy is a labor and delivery nurse. She's a healthcare professional as well. And so it's one of those things where if she had said to a psychiatrist, psychologist, anyone providing treatment, that she thought she was experiencing ideas like she might harm her kids, she would know as a mandated reporter that they were legally required to report that. Now, that might not mean that the police would literally come and take her kids away, but it would mean that there would be an investigation. She would have to answer questions, and it might be that for a period of time she would be separated from the children.
And Doctor, is it? I thought he was done.
I don't know.
Well, we'll find out. Were you done?
I just want to ask a follow-up question about your last point. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, that's okay.
And so you mentioned you didn't think it was a delusion. Is it true that a delusion is a fixed false belief?
Yes, that's the way it's defined.
And so Ms. Clancy thinking that if someone knew she thought of harming her kids might be taken away, that's not a false belief, correct?
Well, that was what I was trying to say, is that it is not a false belief. It's quite possible that it could come to pass.
And if you could continue with your discussion of why the evidence you saw for acute psychosis.
Yes. The other point there at the bottom is that it's appealing as an explanation because it could explain acts that seem so out of character for her. You don't have to get complicated at all. It's just, I had a psychotic episode, I heard a voice, the voice told me to do something terrible, I did it.
And after considering the evidence for acute psychosis, command hallucinations, did you then consider evidence against acute psychosis with command hallucinations?
I did, yes.
And what did you see?
One of the reasons, well, the first bullet point here is that the way she described this as happening is that she heard a voice that she'd never heard before, experienced an hallucination, and she's never experienced it since, but she only experienced it for the 18 minutes or so that it took to kill the children. And to put it mildly, that would be a very, very unusual pattern or manifestation of how this kind of thing comes about. Very unusual. I've been doing this kind of evaluation for many, many years, and I'm always very careful when someone tells me that they experienced a symptom only during the course of committing an offense.
Why is that, doctor? Why are you careful when someone tells you that they only experience this voice during a criminal offense?
Well, because it provides a convenient way of lessening your own culpability. I mean, it's always possible, but as I said, I find it very, very rare, whereas an explanation for why somebody did something, somebody might look at that and say, it's a convenient way of somebody looks at me and I don't have the same culpability that I would otherwise.
And what was the next part of evidence that you saw against acute psychosis?
There was some discussion of whether this was postpartum, And so she was about 8 months away from having given birth to Cowan, her youngest child. And most of the explanations, or most of the sources of authority like DSM-5 or the Cleveland Clinic will point to maybe 1 month after birth or 2 months after birth or something like that. But the farther away you get time-wise from the birth, the less likely it is, under those kinds of authority, to be postpartum. Now, it could be something else. And there were certainly some things that I saw that were symptoms of depression and other sorts of things that she experienced in January. But it was, given the time, it was less likely, I thought, to be postpartum. Then the next bullet was inconsistencies in her account. To me, when asked about this, she said, the voice said, "This is your last chance. You have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself." And it just kept repeating that, and only that, for about 18 minutes, or the duration of the time it took to do this. There were other times, though, for instance, when she was in the hospital after this happened and was talking to a psychiatric attending, when she said that the voice had said other things, for example, the children will suffer without you, or you have to take the kids with you, or things like that. So inconsistency is important because it suggests inaccuracy. In other words, which version is accurate? Is it the first? Is it the second? Is it neither? I mean, here it couldn't be both, because she said, I only heard this. To some people she said that, and then I heard this plus this. To other people she said that.
And doctor, if she had said to a third person that it was a different version, such as you have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself because there's a danger to you and the kids, would that be a further consideration of the inconsistencies?
Objection.
Yeah, overall, yes.
The more inconsistency there is,
Can we have a basis for that, at least?
The
So it's asked as a hypothetical?
hypothetical, yes.
I'll allow that.
So it's not based on evidence, it's a hypothetical.
It's a hypothetical.
you might have to repeat the question.
So if the person has a third version of what happened, what the voice said, and what the reasons the voice gave, would that be important in your assessment as well regarding inconsistency?
Objection. It's speculation, it's not based on evidence, and there's no foundation for a hypothetical question.
Why don't you just ask it as the hypothetical? You know, assuming this, and then go that way.
Doctor, a hypothetical question for you. Assuming that a person has already given two versions of a voice, what the voice said for them to do, and then gives a third version of what the voice told them to do, would that be significant to you in assessing the inconsistencies?
Objection for the record.
Yeah, overall, go ahead.
What I would say is the more inconsistency there is, the more problematic I find it to take any one particular account and say this is the accurate one.
And then what other evidence did you find against acute psychosis?
There is some research that's been conducted on malingered hallucinations, which are accounts of hallucinations that are exaggerated or fabricated. And I found it useful to look at that research and see what it suggested and kind of lay it out there in terms of the way she described it. So some research suggests that that one consideration is whether the voices are internal or external, whether they're coming from your own thoughts or whether they're coming from outside of your head. And Ms. Clancy perceived this voice as external, which is more consistent with genuine hallucinations. However, Command hallucinations are often, in about 88% of individuals reporting them by one account, accompanied by a related delusion. Ms. Clancy did not report any accompanied delusions. So thus far you've got 1 point for genuine and 1 point for possible exaggerated. Then there's frequency and control. Genuine psychotic hallucinations are more often intermittent than constant. They'll come and they'll go. You'll hear it, stop hearing it. You'll hear it again, stop hearing it, and this can extend over a period of time. Ms. Clancy, in this instance, reported that the voice was constant for 18 to 20 minutes, and then it stopped. It had not been experienced before, and it has not been experienced since. And she also did not report having any control over the voice or over her actions in response to the voice. Then the next item is content. So genuine hallucinations are often familiar, use both genders, and are clear rather than vague. Ms. Clancy described this voice as clear, but it was unfamiliar and it was a single male voice. So that was sort of mixed. I'm not counting it as one direction or another. And then finally, reaction and coping. Individuals who experience hallucinations like this often try to reduce their influence in different ways. Could be praying, could be listening to music. And while those who inaccurately report the experience of such hallucinations often do not describe coping mechanisms. And Ms. Clancy didn't report any attempt to stop the voice or distract herself from it or what have you. So there were about 3 points on which her account more closely resembled exaggerated or fabricated hallucinations. One where it looked more genuine and one that was kind of mixed.
If I could ask you a question, you said that there were more points indicating malingering or exaggerating the existence of the voice. But earlier you testified about your psychological testing of Ms. Clancy, and it showed minimization, and it didn't show malingering. Could you explain how those two things could occur in the same person at the same time?
Yes. When we try to appraise through testing or specialized measures something that looks like malingering or exaggeration, the way we typically do it as psychologists who develop the measures is it looks like somebody who is going to take a shotgun approach. They're going to say unusual things are wrong and strange things are wrong and many things are wrong and things like that. If you do that, we're pretty good at picking up that shotgun approach to malingering. But if I ask you a bunch of questions and you answer them almost entirely in a genuine way, that you're being as accurate as you can, except with one exception, when I ask you about one experience or one symptom and you exaggerate or fabricate that, it's we can't pick that up through our testing. So what we have to do instead is we have to kind of develop our ideas about how it might have been experienced, what it was consistent with, what the disorder is. We take a broader approach, which is what I've tried to do in talking about this.
We'll go to the next slide, please. And was there further evidence against acute psychosis?
Yes. I'm going to start with the question of thoughts or hallucinations. I've already said that I found the account of hallucinations to be, as she described it, it would be very, very unusual to experience it that way. Never having, not before, not since, constantly for 18 minutes. However, if this was a thought, an unwelcome, intrusive thought, but still a thought, that's basically this is your last chance, you have to kill the kids so you can kill yourself, then that would be consistent with thoughts that she'd been experiencing for some time. She'd been having thoughts about harming herself, that she was, it was going to be very difficult for her to to do this in a way that was that made sense. She was experiencing thoughts about hurting herself because her brain might have been damaged. She was experiencing thoughts about hurting the kids. She was experiencing all sorts of unwelcome thoughts. If that were the case on January 24th, if these were thoughts, then that would be consistent with what she'd been experiencing for months before. So that was something that made more sense to me, that rather than an auditory hallucination, it would have been an unwelcome, intrusive thought. The next bullet is her response to her husband's question, "What did you do?" So when he got home around 6 p.m. on January 24th, and the house was quiet, and he went in, thought people might have been playing hide and seek with him, called downstairs, didn't get an answer, called upstairs, didn't get an answer, went upstairs, found the bedroom door locked, unlocked it with his key, went in, saw some blood there, saw the window was open, ran downstairs, and he saw his wife Lindsay lying there semi-conscious. And he said his first question was, "What did you do?" And her response was, "I tried to kill myself." Now, I thought that if she had actually experienced this command hallucination, that she might have said something like, "I did what I had to do," or "I did what the voice said," or something like that. But no, she said, "I tried to kill myself." And this is consistent with my looking at this and starting from the perspective of this is a serious, highly lethal suicide attempt. And that's the way to understand it. And then the last bullet point has to do with the recovery of memories. So when she regained consciousness that night in the hospital, one of the things she said is that she wasn't able to remember what had happened. And she was informed of it, but if this had been a genuine memory loss, then human memory is funny. And one of the things that happens is that when you're trying to remember something that actually happened, things can interfere with that. Things that you read, things that you're told, other sorts of things like that. So it would have been hard to understand how she would recover that memory accurately, including the particular memory of the command auditory hallucination, what it said.